The Wolf of Wall Street is considered Martin Scorsese's most audacious film in his entire career. A director who could have easily retired long ago, he showcased the madness and glamour of the world of big money as if he was not 70 years old, but 30 again. He was helped by Leonardo DiCaprio and the stunning Margot Robbie. If you clicked on this video, you have likely seen this film. However, The Wolf of Wall Street is only half as close to reality. Despite the film being nearly 3 hours long, the director hid from the viewers a vast number of stories that are simply unbelievable. But reality is far more interesting than any fictional script. This is not just a retelling of The Wolf of Wall Street or an analysis of scenes, which is plentiful on YouTube. Today you will see an intense profile of Jordan Belfort, a genius swindler who thoroughly exploited the financial system of the United States, but that's not all. In the second part of the video, you will see Belfort through the eyes of his main adversary, the most inventive FBI agent who, in fact, saved Belfort's life several times. We will explore in detail how exactly the wolf robbed people, how it happened that for $200 million stolen, he served only 22 months in prison, and why Jordan Belfort is actually not a wolf, but a sheep in wolf's clothing. Any story about a successful businessman should start with the fact that, in childhood, the hero necessarily lived in poverty. In Belfort's case, this is not quite true. Jordan himself, of course, said that the family was poor, but let's be honest, poor people are unlikely to live in an apartment in New York. Yes, it was a high-rise in Queens, but it was still not a tent in downtown Los Angeles. His parents worked in the financial sector, so Jordan had been immersed in the world of money from childhood. He earned his first capital at the age of 16 by selling ice cream. At this age, it was already clear that Belfort had a natural talent. He not only knew how to sell himself, but could teach others how to do it. In just a couple of months, he raised nearly $20,000, and that was at the 1978 exchange rate. This money was enough to pay for college. Belfort's mother convinced him to become a dentist, but on the very first day of school, one of the professors said that big money does not shine on dentists. Belfort immediately realized that this option did not appeal to him and, without much thought, withdrew his documents. After school, Mark Zuckerberg wrote a prototype for Facebook, Steve Jobs founded Apple, and Belfort was a nobody. He returned home and began selling meat on the outskirts of New York, and here Jordan was able to apply his talent again. He immediately emerged as a leader in sales. He realized that money could be made selling products and persuaded a friend to start their own meat sales company. In the first few months, everything went successfully. The business scaled, and quite quickly, as it would later turn out, even too quickly. By the age of 21, Belfort could afford a red Porsche, which impressed his future wife. But Belfort's strategy was very risky. He purchased all the meat on credit. When the business stopped being profitable, Belfort decided simply not to pay the bills. At the age of 25, Jordan filed for bankruptcy. He lost the company, and the bank took his red Porsche. He lost everything, but to his credit, Belfort did not give up. Few people like the rich and successful, especially the super rich and super successful, and even more so, those who make money literally out of thin air. White-collar workers from Wall Street were perceived by the public as just that, a bit of context. The economy almost always works in cycles. Every downturn is followed by an upswing, and after each upswing comes the inevitable stagnation or decline. Belfort's childhood coincided with a period of economic downturn, but by the 1980s a cycle of strong economic growth had begun. Many were influenced by the monetarist policy, which had the trust of President Reagan. It involved controlling inflation, manually regulating interest rates, and most importantly for us, the deregulation of financial markets. Monetarist policy lifted restrictions for banks, simplified rules and regulations, and encouraged market competition. Advocates of maximum non-intervention by the state in the economy reminisce about those times with nostalgia. Thanks to this policy, many made fortunes, including the infamous Jeffrey Epstein. The epicenter of stock trading, as it had been for the past 200 years, was the street in southern Manhattan. By the late 1980s, Wall Street had undergone an information revolution. New financial instruments became popular: options, futures, junk bonds. Large companies bought out smaller firms. The market grew daily, and every day at least one more new millionaire appeared in the city. Trading also went through a technological transition. Today, almost any stock can be bought with a few taps on a smartphone. Previously, it required interaction with a real person. Often it was the broker who would call his client to suggest profitably selling or buying a stock. This was because only he knew the current price of a security. An ordinary person could learn that, at best, the next day from newspapers. This scene from the film shows what selling a stock looked like: a call, a brief conversation, and there's a flashy ribbon: Microsoft is going down the drain. The world started using the telephone almost from the moment of its invention, but the mechanism of telephone trading took off precisely in the 1980s. It was also then that the computer came to the aid of brokers, no longer requiring several floors of office space. In 1987, when the court confiscated Belfort's red Porsche, a film about Wall Street was released. It was directed by Oliver Stone, with the main roles played by the stars of that time: Michael Douglas, Charlie Sheen and Martin Sheen. The film recouped its production costs 3 times over at the box office and sparked widespread interest in the world of brokers, where trading stocks turned people into millionaires. At this very moment, the 25-year-old Belfort, inspired by a film, got a job at a respected company with nearly a century of history. The position he landed was dubious: an errand boy. He simply connected the real broker with the client over the phone. However, what is more interesting is how exactly he got this job. During the interview, the manager asked Belfort to sell him something. Jordan then randomly picked a stock and began to extol it. "I'm telling you, it will soon rise. Profit is inevitable." The manager told him that what he just did was absolutely illegal and that a stock couldn't be advertised in that manner. But he hired him anyway. Let's remember this moment. Belfort spent almost 6 months interning in the boiler room, the name of the place where brokers would call their clients. The profane madness depicted in the film was still an exaggeration, but the work was indeed not for the faint-hearted. No modern-day scammer in call centres posing as bank or police employees could endure such a level of stress. Belfort witnessed firsthand how people made and lost fortunes simply by chatting over the phone. The boiler room was not without the main export commodity of Pablo Escobar. The Wall Street Journal first began writing about the critical cocaine situation in the late 70s. In the 80s, the situation only worsened. The scene where Belfort's mentor almost forces him to get hooked on drugs to work more effectively is most likely true. Only Jordan's mentor was younger than in the film. He had started working at the company just a couple of years before Belfort. After 6 months, Jordan finally got his license and became a full-fledged broker. And it just so happened that, literally a month later, the laws of economics took effect. The financial bubble that had been inflating for 10 years finally burst. In one Black Monday in 1987, the market dropped by a quarter, and the company, with almost a century-long history where Jordan worked, went bankrupt. After this, the government began to regulate financial markets more strictly, and Belfort found himself back on the street. But this time, he decided not to give up. Over 20 years, authorities have jailed dozens of white-collar criminals, but this did not stop anyone from coming up with new schemes for illegal earnings. And every time the government was lagging behind because this cumbersome machine was not particularly interested in stock markets. After the stock exchange collapsed, the 25-year-old Jordan accidentally stumbled upon an ad in the newspaper. The company was looking for brokers to trade in so-called penny stocks. Out of desperation, Belfort went there for employment. He had to find a way to support his young wife, who married a rich man but ended up living with an unemployed one. And Jordan did not lose out. A few words about what penny stocks are. They appeared in the 19th century and primarily aimed to support small and even micro businesses. The benefit for companies was that they attracted capital. Shareholders, in turn, were pleased that the shares were super affordable and stocks could be purchased in hundreds, if not thousands. Success was not guaranteed, as even Apple and Microsoft started in garages. While a single share of a serious company could average up to $100, penny stocks, as the name implies, cost mere pennies and cents. Before being listed on the stock exchange, serious companies underwent checks as they valued their reputation. There was nothing of the sort in the penny stocks market. Another significant point was that these stocks were sold off-exchange, practically without any government control. Such transactions were entirely legal, but only when conducted without malicious intent. You get the idea. Belfort joined this firm and then learned that it itself charged commissions for each transaction. Some companies set a 10% commission, others 30%, while the rate on Wall Street was tens of times lower. Belfort realized that these exorbitant commissions were the key to his future success. In a day, dozens of transactions could be made. In just the first month, he earned $38,000 in commissions, and in the second month, $70,000. The 50% commission shown in the movie is an exaggeration. But within a year, Belfort managed to pocket a clean $500,000. The sales methods were undoubtedly unethical and often illegal, but the regulatory bodies at the time primarily focused only on large companies. Belfort could then promise clients the moon while selling shares of low-quality companies. Just a couple of years ago, he was a dismal bankrupt, with assets reduced to nothing but a ton of frozen meat. Now he had earned himself a new Jaguar, moved to an elite neighborhood, and become a millionaire. After this, an incredible rise began, or rather a fall. Before earning millions, Belfort often took the bus to work. Riding with him was his neighbor from the same building, Nancy Porush. When she learned about Belfort's earnings, she insisted that her husband, who happened to also be her cousin, talk to him. The very next day, Danny Porush quit his job and also became a broker. His role in the film was played by Jonah Hill. Belfort and Danny founded their company, Stratton Oakmont. It was a subsidiary of another legal entity, Stratton Securities, a parent company working in corporate finance. The general public knew nothing about it. Later, Belfort would buy it out and start actively using this brand. Stratton Oakmont was a new company. Her office was located in a showroom of an abandoned parking lot, but in conversations with potential clients, it was already a serious firm with a decade-long history that, as it happened, was emerging to the public for the first time. Belfort himself referred to it not as deceit, but as a better version of the truth. Belfort's strategy was the same as before, to continue selling penny stocks to people. And for this, he recruited a team of people who had almost never worked with stocks before. Many of them were such novices that they had to ask others to take the broker's exam on their behalf. Each of them was earning about $10,000 a month. A decent sum, but not too impressive for New York. Then Belfort decided to change his strategy. Whereas before he had been pushing penny stocks only to the middle class, he now decided to target wealthier individuals as well. He acquired a database containing millions of numbers of the wealthiest Americans and began working through them. Initially, he was unsuccessful, but after some manipulations, his strategy started to succeed. Then Belfort prepared a full sales script and began training his apprentices. Today, this sales instruction can be found publicly, but it is, to say the least, outdated. They would call investors and say the price will double, triple. We have insider information. We are very close to the management of this company. We have only 5,000 shares left. Hurry up. And if suddenly an investor said they needed to talk to their wife, the brokers would answer, "What wife? Don't you make decisions in your own house? She'll be only happy." The updated version of this sales technique Belfort still peddles for $500 per course. And now, let's dive into how exactly Stratton Oakmont deceived its clients. In the film, Belfort is depicted as someone who just wants to swindle naive investors, but in reality, that was impossible. He would have been jailed immediately. Jordan was not completely insane, Most of the deals with Stratton Oakmont were entirely legal, but we're not here for that. Let's look at the dark side of his business. The film says almost nothing about this, but the grey eminence behind Belfort's dark schemes became Alvin Abrams. When they first met on Wall Street, Abrams had been engaging in illegal schemes for at least 20 years. Belfort's con was quite primitive, based on key market principles, supply and demand, all according to the precepts of Adam Smith. There's nothing wrong with playing on these principles using intuition, personal knowledge, or sheer luck. Problems arise when you start manipulating the market. What did Belfort do? Step 1. Establish control. Using straw men, he bought a large portion of the shares of small companies, thus reducing supply. The stock prices didn't change, the company was unwanted, the securities cost mere cents. Step 2. Selling the story. As soon as he gained control over the companies, Belfort practically unleashed brokers on investors. They would call and rave about an unknown company, as if by tomorrow it would become the most renowned company on Wall Street. This could go on for weeks, thus creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. The brokers would say, "Remember, I recommended that firm to you. In the past week it has tripled in value. Hurry up." Step 3. We secure the profit. At the moment when the price broke through the previously set ceiling, Belfort would abruptly sell his shares at the peak value. When real investors realized their shares were tanking, Belfort did everything possible to prevent them from selling their assets. It reached a point of absurdity. At one point, brokers were forbidden to pick up the phone to answer client calls. Ultimately, Belfort bought in at low prices, flooded the market with misinformation, and sold high. This scheme is called pump and dump. However, Belfort himself is not fond of this term, as in English it connotes with gastrointestinal functions. Was Belfort the first to use this scheme? Certainly not. Does pump and dump work today? Just look at the cryptocurrency market where such schemes are run almost daily. Now, instead of Stratton Oakmont shops, there are Discord servers and popular bloggers. Belfort's main advantage was that he created a company that perfectly mixed legal and illegal sales. They traded shares of large, reputable companies, occasionally selling penny stocks to investors. But when the time came, they conducted a pump and dump, earning millions from these manipulations. Altogether, Stratton would see more than 40 similar cases. The most famous case involved the women's shoe designer Steve Madden, then a little-known startup designer. Front companies purchased shares of this brand when they were just entering the market. Prices were artificially inflated, and at the peak they were offloaded. Yet now it wasn't just naive investors losing money, but actual market sharks. Such schemes were unfamiliar to them on the exchange. The golden years began for Stratton Oakmont. Today, Belfort misses not the money or the wildlife most, but his company. In the early 90s, thousands of people began working at Stratton Oakmont, and they moved to a business centre farther from Manhattan. Today, ordinary cars park at this building, but at the time, only Ferraris and Porsches could be seen there, despite the area not being affluent. People came to Stratton who dreamed of making it to Wall Street, even when, theoretically, they could not pass an interview there. This embodied Belfort's philosophy. It was cheaper and easier to train someone hungry for money than to work with university graduates, especially since an educated person was unlikely to stay at a company where contests such as whoever sells a share fastest gets a prostitute dancing on my table took place. In the company, there was a unique atmosphere. People communicated, argued, got married, and earned enormous amounts of money. At its peak, over 1,000 people worked there. The average salary was approaching $100,000 a year, according to the exchange rate at that time. Belfort was not just their boss, he was almost a cult leader. Every day, he motivated them for work, and after the workday, he allowed them to do whatever they desired. The intimate scene in the elevator is also true. Because of such a lifestyle, Belfort's first wife left him. Sometime later, he met the British model Nadine Caridi. The peak of her career was supporting roles in a beer commercial, but this did not matter to Belfort. Nadine started a new life. She lived in an elite house that once belonged to the president of the New York Stock Exchange. She had a yacht on which Coco Chanel once rested. However, that was until the moment Jordan, in an incoherent state, destroyed it in a storm. He survived by a miracle. But material pleasures were not enough for Belfort. His lawyers complained that Jordan could spend days on drugs. Once, he even attempted to end his life, but he was revived. Another time, Belfort nearly died when he drove under the influence. Ironically, as in the film, Belfort still has no memory of completely wrecking his own car. However, there is an inconsistency. In the movie, the police supposedly could not prove that Jordan was the driver. In reality, it was not difficult to establish this. According to Belfort himself, a corrupt county judge helped him avoid jail. It's interesting to note that Belfort was not ashamed to flaunt his lifestyle. This was not only due to insecurities or greed. Through this, Jordan skillfully manipulated his employees. They strove to emulate their boss's lifestyle, thus spending all their money on luxury items, leaving them penniless. As early as the year 1992, the Securities and Exchange Commission initiated an investigation into Stratton Oakmont's activities. It's crucial to understand that this body was civil and could not significantly harm the company. They could impose fines, which could be written off as operating costs, but they couldn't imprison anyone. After 2 years of investigations, Jordan realized it was better to strike a deal with the authorities. Belfort admitted that his sales methods were too aggressive. He paid $2.5 million in fines and left his company, leaving Danny Porish in the shadows. In the movie, this story is portrayed as if Belfort decided to stay. Jordan himself says it always pains him to watch this part of the film because he appears as a complete fool there, because if he had taken the deal, he could have peacefully lived on the millions he earned. But in real life, already by the year 1994, Belfort was doomed. For the last 2 years, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had been closely monitoring him. It is time to talk about the main character of this anti-heroic story, FBI agent Greg Coleman. Kyle Chandler portrayed his role in the film. When Coleman was around 20 years old, he still didn't understand what he would become when he grew up. While Belfort was trading meat, this colleague obtained a broker's license and tried his hand in the financial market. But, as with Jordan, it was Black Friday that decided his fate. After the market crash, Coleman joined the FBI, where he focused on tackling financial fraud. It's amusing. Coleman clearly failed as a broker, so he decided to go after those who were much more successful. It's almost like Jose Mourinho's football career. He was a complete loser as a player and decided to achieve what he couldn't as a player in the role of someone who stands above them. Such hypercompensation. In the year 1992, 33-year-old Coleman de facto led a new investigation department that dealt with white-collar crimes. It is important to note that before Greg's arrival, almost no one took large-scale financial fraud seriously. I should remind you that at the same time, the Securities Commission was already studying the criminal activities of Stratton Oakmont. The FBI was doing the same, but using different methods. The Belfort case was one of the first cases handled by the agent. But Jordan was far from the only criminal Coleman was pursuing. He was merely a figure in a much larger case. But credit where it's due, his lifestyle indeed differed significantly from other fraudsters. In this FBI agent's work, there were no personal motives, as shown in the film. The legendary lobster scene, where Jordan tried to bribe the agent on a yacht, never happened. Jordan did indeed hire a private investigator to dig up Coleman's dossier to see if it was possible to bribe him. Incidentally, a real private detective hired by Belfort played his role in the film. But when Jordan realized that Coleman could not be bought, he abandoned those attempts. Although there is a very amusing story about the yacht scene, Agent Coleman was involved in writing the script, and when he was shown the initial version of their dialogue with DiCaprio, the agent said he would never have acted that way. The screenwriter asked what he would do if he actually met Belfort, and then Coleman began explaining his thought process, and the screenwriter carefully noted down what he said. That's how the scene made its way into the film. Coleman demonstrated what he constantly did in his work, facing criminals. He played cat and mouse with them. That's why the yacht scene turned out so lively and captivating. Coleman's work was not enviable. The agent had to sift through tons of documents, analyzing almost every transaction. According to him, what he used to do in months, he could now accomplish in just half an hour in Excel. Another problem for Coleman was the indifference from his superiors. The agent knew exactly what, where, and when Belfort would act. However, the FBI would not allow him to use wiretaps, install hidden cameras, or engage in other tactics commonly associated with mafia-related cases. Yet, Coleman did not lose heart. Remember the massive diagram from the movie that the agent drew? It really looked like that. There are archival clips showing this diagram lying on the floor. Coleman's main problem was with the type of crimes involved. If Belfort had been trading arms or drugs, it would have been a different story. But Jordan was selling stocks, often perfectly legally. How could one identify the crime here? The key principle Coleman used was remarkably simple: follow the money. When faced with tens of thousands of financial operation documents, one needs to look for those who gain the most benefit. Coleman found them. After a couple of years of intensive work, Coleman dug up plenty of evidence but couldn't do anything with it. Meanwhile, Belfort continued deceiving people. The agent then realized he couldn't catch him solely on financial manipulations. It was an insane amount of work for many months ahead. So he decided to study a case from the Securities and Exchange Commission and stumbled upon the name Alvin Abrams, the very person who had taught Belfort his schemes. He decided to look into this person's banking history and discovered something very odd. Look, on Monday he withdraws $9,500. On Tuesday, he withdraws $9,600. On Wednesday, $9,700. This continued every day for several months. In total, over $2 million accumulated during this period. The agent immediately understood what was happening. Amidst the fight against drugs, U.S. authorities had devised a new way to combat money laundering. Any cash transaction over $10,000 required reporting to the tax authorities by any legal entity. Honest people had no issues with this. Buy a car with cash and it's fine if the tax office knows. For criminals, however, it became a huge headache. They now had to stay below the $10,000 threshold, or the transaction would become known to authorities. The problem arises when, if the FBI deliberately wants to check your banking history and seize such transactions, you are instantly suspected of structuring. This is a key element of money laundering. Following this, Coleman arrested Abrams, his secretary, and seized all accounting records. Under the threat of real prison time, he coerced them into a deal with the investigation to reveal why they were withdrawing the money. The scheme operated as follows. Abrams managed one of Belfort's shell companies. Every time Stratton Oakmont manipulated the market, Abrams' company, knowing whether the stock would rise or fall, profited from it. But the revenue breakdown is far more interesting. From every million earned, $250,000 went to Abrams, another $250,000 to Belfort, and the remaining $500,000 to taxes. Belfort was no fool. He remembered well what Capone was jailed for, not for organizing a criminal syndicate and not for hundreds of murders, but for the banal act of tax evasion, which is why Belfort didn't want to take risks. Agent Coleman always said that Belfort was the ideal white-collar criminal. He was smart, charismatic, disciplined, and creative, the most dangerous combination for a fraudster. However, he had his own weak spot, similar to that of cartels. Too much money not spent without attracting unwanted attention. In the United States, this was especially challenging. It's not Colombia, and for some reason, flying there or to Mexico to buy luxurious property was not something Belfort wanted to do. Already aware that Belfort was using intermediaries to structure his revenue, the agent decided to take a closer look at the sources of his wealth. It turned out that Jordan declared an income of around $15 million on which he paid taxes conscientiously. However, his assets were valued at $40 million. Where did the money that was not on the declaration go? It's all quite simple. Already, when Belfort was being dissected by the Securities Commission, he began preparing to exit the game. At that time, Jordan arranged a small vacation for himself and travelled around the world. A month later, he returned home with several offshore companies and bank accounts in Geneva, Liechtenstein, the Virgin Islands, and several South American countries. No taxes, declarations, or bureaucratic hassles. However, Belfort already understood that he didn't have much time left. In the year 1994, when he left the firm to Denny Porosh, it turned out that in financial operations related to Stratton Oakmont, strange offshore entities began to actively participate which had not been involved in deals before. Coleman put two and two together and started digging in this direction. Initially, he discovered that Todd Garrett's wife, a friend of Belfort, who was a simple unemployed housewife, invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in foreign stocks annually. And what a coincidence! She was Swiss by birth. Having obtained more evidence, he detained Garrett and his wife and charged them. In the film, Garrett is shown as a tough nut who didn't give up Belfort. In reality, he immediately spilled everything he knew. Documents, dates, passwords, everything to protect himself and his wife. It turned out that for several years, Belfort had been smuggling cash into Swiss banks. His relatives up to the third degree were involved in the scheme. Uncles, aunts, nephews. 6 years after the investigation began, the FBI agent knew the names of all the couriers, and brokers were feeding him information on every deal. Most importantly, he was able to prove that the offshore companies and Swiss accounts belonged to Belfort. Each transaction with them was considered money laundering. This was the end for Belfort. Unlike market manipulation, authorities treated the legalization of illegal proceeds very seriously. In November 1998, Belfort was arrested and charged. He faced up to 27 years in prison. Jordan Belfort confessed to everything: manipulations, money laundering, and various other mortal sins. He understood that if he did not cooperate with the investigation, at best, he would see his children only as a pensioner. Belfort made a deal and began wearing a federal wire under his clothes. Now, an important moment that I have already mentioned in passing. Scorsese's film focuses solely on Belfort, but in reality he was not the main target of the FBI. After his arrest, Agent Coleman wanted to capture several dozen larger criminals. On the very first day Belfort wore a microphone under his shirt, he went to a restaurant with his friend. At that moment, Coleman sat in a car near the restaurant and listened carefully to their conversation. Here is what he heard. "Friend, do you remember when we used to pull off those schemes? Remember that thing with Steve Madden?" Belfort's friend inexplicably remained silent and then replied that he couldn't recall anything like that. Then Jordan asked him several more provocative questions, and his friend responded that he remembered nothing, claimed no involvement, and suggested that Belfort might benefit from taking a break and clearing his head. As soon as the meeting ended, Jordan's companion left the restaurant, called an associate and said, "You won't believe it, I just met with Jordan," and he handed me a napkin on which it was written, "Don't incriminate yourself, I'm wired." Belfort's friend was unaware of one fact. The person he decided to call after the meeting and inform about Jordan's action had been cooperating with the FBI for several years. By 1998, they had rounded up everyone: secretaries, brokers, managers. Belfort didn't understand this and continued to play his usual game even under the threat of a lengthy prison sentence. That very day, Agent Coleman visited Belfort and told him that he could terminate his deal with the investigation right now and send him behind bars for all 27 years. But in the heat of the moment, Coleman decided against it and went home to ponder. He weighed all the pros and cons and decided not to break the deal, although he had every right to do so. Coleman realized that since Belfort had already agreed to turn in his friend, internally he was ready to cooperate. The napkin incident was another attempt by Belfort to circumvent the system. Well, that's just his habit. What can you do? Belfort understood everything as well, and for the next year, he worked with the FBI, exposing everyone he knew. One of the people he turned in ended up being sentenced to 85 years, practically a life sentence. Almost 20 times more than Belfort himself received. The court sentenced Belfort to 4 years in prison, but Belfort served only 22 months. For half a year, his cellmate was the famous American comedian Tommy Chong. Why Belfort served so little time is a mystery even to the FBI agent. Belfort was supposed to have his sentence reduced for cooperating with the investigation, but Coleman was certain that since he had pursued him for 6 years, he should serve at least that amount of time. But the court thought otherwise. Even in prison, the administration of the facility found Belfort a hobby, something akin to motivational speaking. During this time, his cellmate suggested he write a book about his adventures. That is exactly what Belfort did. Throughout his time in prison, he focused on expressing his thoughts in writing, and 6 years after his release, he finally published his magnum opus, The Wolf of Wall Street. Thanks to brilliant marketing, the book became a bestseller. Now, regarding the movie, work on the screenplay began as early as 2006, a year before the book's release. Belfort's editor contacted Leonardo DiCaprio, and when the actor read the script, he promised Belfort that he would definitely star in his adaptation. At that time, the screenplay was being worked on by the writers of the series The Sopranos. Potential directors included Martin Scorsese, Todd Phillips and Ridley Scott. DiCaprio, Brad Pitt and Mark Wahlberg were vying for the lead role. However, in 2008, two crises coincided: a global economic crisis and a writers' strike, similar to the one that began in May this year. Although Belfort received nearly $1 million for the film rights, the idea of the film was shelved. Belfort decided to pass the time as a motivational speaker. He began traveling to various countries, talking about both trivial and not-so-trivial things related to sales, marketing, and persuasion techniques. 4 years later, DiCaprio contacted Belfort again and said that Scorsese was finally ready to make the film about him. But here's what's interesting. The last time they communicated, Belfort lived in a small one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of New York, and now he was back in a mansion by the ocean. When DiCaprio learned about this, he immediately informed Scorsese, and he fully rewrote the film's ending. Originally, the film ended with the protagonist behind bars, a traditional ending for Scorsese's crime films. However, the screenwriters rewrote it. Now, the real Jordan Belfort was inviting DiCaprio onto the stage as the greatest business coach in the world. And that perhaps is the biggest lie of the entire film and of Jordan Belfort himself. This next part is the most ambiguous of this story because the whole phenomenon of the Wolf of Wall Street, including even my video, is one big deception and marketing. Look at this graph. It's a representation of mentions and searches of the phrase the Wolf of Wall Street, indicating people's interest in this topic and character. Before 2006, silence. The book's release in 2007, a total calm. In 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, the book was already out and even became a bestseller, but The Wolf of Wall Street was of no interest to anyone. Then, Scorsese's film promo campaign began and the film was released. After that, a decline. It's somewhat ironic that the graph looks like a classic Belfort pump-and-dump scheme. What's my point here? The main con of Jordan Belfort is not the millions of dollars stolen or the thousands of ruined investors. The main con is his personal brand. You see, Belfort, no matter how much he wished, wasn't extremely wealthy. Among the world's richest, a fortune of $60 million isn't very impressive to anyone. Looking at his criminal schemes, the pump-and-dump technique is a classic of fraudulent schemes. Did he make the most money from it? Again, no. Did Belfort influence the tightening of laws? Well, only partially. For example, the opening of the FBI Special Division, where Coleman worked, was provoked by Michael Milken and Ivan Boesky. You have probably hardly heard of them, but they stole billions through bonds. And now the key point. No one ever called Belfort the Wolf of Wall Street. In the newspapers, he was referred to as the meat salesman, not the wolf, as Scorsese portrayed. This was mentioned by Agent Coleman himself. During the 6 years of the investigation, he never heard this phrase that made Belfort world famous. The real person with that nickname lived in the United States at the end of the 19th century. His name was David Lamar, not Jordan Belfort. Another important aspect is the question of whether Belfort managed to rise from the bottom after being released from prison. The court ruled that Belfort and his colleagues should compensate the victims of the fraud with $110 million. Part of this money was immediately reimbursed with Belfort's seized property, his cars and houses. After serving his sentence, Belfort continues to enjoy life and travel. How much Belfort still owes is unclear, but every time he is reminded of it, he gets furious. It's even worse when he is directly accused of not paying his bills. The fate of Danny Porush was even sadder. He also served several years in prison, divorced his cousin, and since then, according to his wife, has ignored any compensations he is supposed to pay. The fate of the FBI agents turned out much better. After Coleman outmaneuvered Belfort, he continued to work in the Bureau on other white-collar cases. Later, he left the FBI, opened his own consulting firm, and also became a speaker. The former agent travels the world with lectures on the Belfort case investigation. The most surprising thing is that Coleman befriends him and attends his podcasts and events. Every time journalists ask him to say something bad about Jordan, he refuses. The result is an incredible story. Jordan Belfort is no wolf, but a sheep in wolf's clothing. He was a moderately successful criminal, but the success was very short-lived. Jordan loves himself, he loves his criminal path and the glamour of madness shown in the film. Jordan would have remained an obscure fraudster who traded penny stocks, ruined his health with drugs, betrayed everyone around him, and served less than 2 years for it. But credit should be given to Belfort. The book, film, and brilliant marketing did their job.